So welcome everybody to this webinar where we will discuss children's participation in the urban planning process and specifically the placemaking process. So this is a webinar series that we at the Safer Sweden Foundation is arranging together with Future Place Leadership and Link Architecture. So my name is Marika Haug and I'm a criminologist working with urban planning as one of my main crime preventive tools. So that's my perspective into this topic. And I will moderate this webinar together with Elise Perrault. So over to you, Elise.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Marika, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Elise Perrault. I work at Future Place Leadership, one of the other partner organizations that was part of this placemaking in the Nordic talks. And I just want to say, like Marika mentioned, this webinar is part of a larger series dedicated to child-friendly cities that will take place over this spring. We had the first session already in February dedicated to child and children engagement, where we raised different methods to engage children and also issues of diversity and why it was important for city development to understand how children use and perceive their environment. So all of this is available if you're interested in listening it. But today we will focus on the urban planning process and the role that children can play. And Marika will talk a bit more about that topic.
Yes, so that's who we are, and this is who you are. So we are very excited that we have participants from 42 different countries all over the world. So we think that bodes well for kind of interesting perspectives into the discussion that we will have later on. But before we really go into this webinar, I think that it's important that we share some common grounds. So I will talk briefly about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the main question, the main topic for this webinar. So how is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child actually affecting the urban planning process? So today we will focus on Article 12 in the Convention, and this is Article 12. So it states that states parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, the views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. And I want to emphasize some parts in this article. And the first is what is a child according to the convention. So the convention defines children as every human being below the age of 18. And this means, of course, that our target group for this webinar is kind of big. It also states that adults or children should be able to express their views freely in all matters affecting the child, which means that our area of interest is kind of big. And it also states that adults need to give the views of the child due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. And this means that adults aren't obliged to do exactly what children says, but we need to seriously consider the views of children in the urban planning process. And if we're not able to meet the needs of children, we need to motivate why and why not. So I hope that gave you some insight into Article 12. And now it's time for a poll.
Yes, so both of our speakers today are from Sweden, Karin and Lilian. So there will be a slight focus maybe on the Swedish urban planning context and the Swedish urban planning framework. But since all of you are from different parts of the world, I think it's great if we can also have this discussion on how children's engagement takes place in your different locations and different countries. So please just give us first your inputs on this poll, and don't hesitate to share the chat to also give us inputs on how this topic relates to your local context. Thank you.
And while you answer the poll, I thought that I would give you some insight in how we at the Safer Sweden Foundation is implementing the UN Convention in a process where we include children. So I thought that I would give you a brief introduction to a toolbox that we have developed together with the county administrative. Oh, my cat is going crazy in the background. Together with the county administration in Blekinge in Sweden. So this is a toolkit, Tryggare skola, Safer Schools in English, where we are working to help schools to work with crime preventive tools in their schools. So we have worked to increase children's participation in this toolkit in different ways, and more specifically in 2 different kind of ways. So in this process, there is a work group who leads this process. And in the work group, we have student representatives. And the student representatives doesn't have any responsibility over crime prevention in the school, but they are involved in the work group in the kind of process where decisions are being made to make sure that the students' perspectives are taken care of throughout the process. And we also arrange co-creative processes together with students and more specifically participants from each grade to make sure that students are being offered an opportunity to express their views about their schools, about the preventive work in the schools, etc. And when we developed this process, our main focus was to create an inclusive process. And I think that today we will talk a lot about inclusion and representation. So for us, our main focus was to create an inclusive process. So we did this by offering students different kind of ways to express themselves, because we know that we are all unique individuals and we express ourselves best in different kind of ways. So in our process, children are able to express themselves via speaking if they are comfortable with that. And if they're not comfortable with that, they can write letters, or they can draw pictures, or they can build with Legos to show what they think about their schools. And we have also developed a model to make sure that there's a quality in this process. I won't go into details about that, but if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. And this is just examples on how student participation can look in the practice. So to the left, there are some girls who have built their locker room to make sure that we know that boys in this school were able to look into their locker room through the door. And there's a boy who has drawn a picture of his gymnastic hall because he had some issues with that he discussed with us. So it can look in different kind of ways. But now I'm curious as to what you have replied in the poll.
Yes, I'm gonna end the poll now and share results with you. Can you see it? So it seems like the participation and involvement of children among participants' location is more on the low side, with 25% that's rated very low, 30% where there's a bit of participation, but it's still very low, and only 4% of people that have rated it a high level of involvement. So I guess we need to, in the discussion, also talk about why this is happening like this and what is good or bad involvement of children.
So now we will dive into our webinar and introduce our very interesting speakers. So we are finished with the introduction, and now we will listen to Lilian Helgason and Karin Alsen. And after they have given their presentations, there will be it will be time for questions. And if you have any questions for Lilian or Karin, you can give us to them via the chat. So you find the chat down below in the Zoom room. So Lilian, the stage is yours. And Lilian Helgason is the president of Sweden's Pupil Council.
Yes, thank you. So I worked with youth participation in city planning for a lot in my life. So since I was in 7th grade, and now I'm in the 3rd grade in what we call gymnasium, so that would be 6 years apart. I've worked in a forum which is called the Gothenburg City Youth Council, which is based obviously in Gothenburg, and it is a group of publicly voted on and elected youth from all parts of Gothenburg who come together and discuss and make policy propositions and discuss with the politicians of our city the changes that we would like to see to Gothenburg. And we also work as an instance for discussing policy changes that the politicians are introducing. But as a part of this forum, I've worked a lot on city planning and on placemaking, which is a subject that I think is of major importance for an inclusive society, to make sure that everyone, including youth, are part of this process. And I feel that the biggest problem concerning how big parts youth are in city planning and in planning of all parts of the city are that most often I feel like the grown-up politicians of the city see youth as people who are growing into being citizens instead of already being citizens. And I feel that that is problematic, obviously, because youth are citizens from the day they're born, and their voices should be heard equally as their grown-up counterparts, which is something that, oh, what a cute cat, which is something that that isn't the case today. The instances of children being, talked about as someone who should learn about the city and should learn about democracy, so that they one day could be part of these processes, instead of encouraging the inclusiveness today, is something that I see every day when I'm working with politicians. And what I've learned through the workshops and the different processes that we have engaged in is that, as Marika said earlier, it's often, when children come with ideas, they're often big and flamboyant, and they have huge ideas for bettering society, and oftentimes they're perceived as unrealistic by the grown-up politicians. And the solution to this is obviously not to build all the water parks that youth wants and create all the things that youth want, but to find the core of the need. Because usually when youth have an idea, or when they have something that they want to install in the city, this is because they are missing something. They are missing a place to gather. They are missing somewhere to feel safe. And that is the core that we should find, instead of thinking that it's unrealistic to build this huge mall or something. I feel like a lot of times the grown-up politicians, they are dismissing the ideas of youth because at first glance they aren't realistic, instead of discussing with them and having a conversation about what the need is and how we can form this idea to fit in the city, so that everyone can partake in it, and so that it's realistic from an economic point of view as well. And I would like to also bring up one of the most interesting cases and the best case, I think, for how placemaking was a process in my city, which is when my forum built we didn't build, the city built, but we had a discussion with the Department of, I guess it's like Parks and Recreation, but it's called the Park and Nature Management Department, I think, something like that in English. And we had a discussion with them about what places of the city we feel unsafe in and why, and what parts of the city we could help change and in what ways. And we had the idea of, there's this bus stop in Sweden, or in Gothenburg, where there are tunnels leading through the bus stop and through different, places in the bus stop, and they're often dimly lit and they're dark and they feel unsafe to walk in. And so we had the idea of decorating them with mosaics. And so this was something that we obviously didn't have a structure for before. This hadn't happened before, but we were in contact with these artists that helped people build their own mosaics, and people from the community from all over Gothenburg came together and built these mosaics, and then they were put up in these tunnels. And what happened then is that the part of the solution was that people felt a lot more safe walking there. They were now more lit than before. And another great thing about this is that there are almost no damage done to these places, because as a community we feel part of this place is in another way than we did before. And when that happens, I feel like that's the best example for placemaking, because the whole community, from old seniors to young children, could come together and create this place and build these mosaics in any way they wanted, and we could come together and put them up, and then the place felt much more safe. And it was a community effort that was listened to by the politicians of the city, which I feel is a great step forward in what placemaking means. So to, I guess, what is it? What do we need to create these forums? Is something that I'd also like to answer. Is I feel like oftentimes we need to make sure that youth are heard in forums that they feel interested in participating in. When we talk about issues like this, we want youth to participate, but we don't talk about why they don't want to participate, or being okay with the fact that everyone isn't interested in city planning. And so what we need to create is forums where youth feel appreciated and listened to, and where their opinions and ideas can be, where we can find the core of the idea, or the need of that idea, and build it together. And I find that this placemaking idea is something that needs both youth and obviously adult solutions to really implement throughout the city. And I think that is what I like to bring to this conversation, at least. Thank you
so much, Lilian. That was really interesting. I think you bring up really important points that are very necessary for starting this discussion. I especially appreciate your comments on the need to consider you as full citizens and fully grown citizens, and you started to tap into that a little bit. But I think an immediate follow-up questions I have for you is, what do you need from civil servants and politicians to fully engage you in these processes, ideally, and to exert your right, as you said, as a fully grown citizen? So what would you need from us urban planners or civil servants or municipalities?
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest problem in this is that we have this view of children that needs to change. So maybe this, because the structures are informed by our view of children, and the view is often that there's this great clip that I love, which is of I think she's the finance minister of Sweden, when they had proposed the budget of some year, and she was walking through Stockholm with this budget, and then she saw a couple of youths on the street, and she started going ecstatic because she wanted them so badly to be a part of this. She was going like, oh my god, there's youth, you need to bring them here. And I find that so funny, because I understand that she wants youth to participate, and that is important, but treating youth as some part of other people of society than grown-ups, or that we are somehow different in our views, or that we always have views that don't matter, is destructive, I think. And to change the structures, we need to just have a changed view of children, and a changed view of what children can bring to the table, because oftentimes children bring really interesting and great ideas. And you know, when we form the structures, they are often formed through discussions, and the civil servants of the society, they sit together and they discuss how we in the best ways can bring forward the thoughts of youth. And so I think the best ways to change those structures is to change the views of those people, of children, so that they can be more broad and representative of how youth actually think and work.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think we're going to take more questions later when we have this this longer discussion. So please, you can already share them in the chat with us. And I'd like now to ask Karin to present for us the project that she's been working on. Karin is a project manager of Focus Skärholmen, a project that is taking place in the city of Stockholm. She's an architect, and she works at the Exploateringskontoret. So the how do you translate that? Urban planning, urban development.
Development department in Stockholm. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Karin. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to share my screen now. Does everyone see the screen now?
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to Skärholmen and welcome to the main square in Skärholmen. My name is Karin Alsén. I'm an architect and I'm a project director of Focus Skärholmen, one of the most interesting urban development projects in Stockholm right now. This square is one of the most vibrant and interesting places in Stockholm and is the center in the district of Skärholmen. And here is a large amount of both public and commercial services. We have the big mall, we have the best and cheapest veg and fruit market, we have a church, a mosque, a theater. Well, this is in many ways a very vibrant and interesting place to be. But it is also like this. Welcome to Skärholmen. Skärholmen was planned and designed during the 60s and the 70s, a very modernistic urban planning. The car was in focus in the traffic planning. The different functions are very separated. There is a lot of in-between areas so that the urban environment is not so very dense. As you can see, there's a lot of asphalt and there is also a lot of areas where people feel insecure. So this is a place where we both have space to build new urban development, and also the urban development can contribute to make a difference. And when I say Skärholmen, I mean the whole district of Skärholmen, and the district is 4 different areas: Bredäng, Sätra, Skärholmen and Vårberg. And this is a part of Stockholm that is furthest southwest of Stockholm. And as you can see on this map, we have a lot of urban qualities here already today. We have near the Lake Mälaren and a lot of beaches and very, very nice recreation areas. We have a big forest, which is the most important quality in the district today. We have 4 local centers with local service in Skärholmen, and we also have subway to all these 4 areas. So it's a perfect place to develop more urban development. And the background to the project Focus Skärholmen is a mission in the budget of 2016, where the budget assigned the department, where the urban planning department and the development department with the project Focus Skärholmen, and the aim was to build 4,000 new housing units in the district. And then the city council decided to make Focus Skärholmen the flagship project in the field of social sustainable urban development. And right now we are planning for 6,500 new housing units in the district of Skärholmen. And as you can see, it is all over the place, and it's a mix of small infill projects and bigger projects. So it's 16 different projects going on, urban projects or urban development projects going on. And I was asked to talk about children's participation, and there is not one way of working with children's participation in urban planning. There is a lot of different ways of working, and it depends on the context, of course, and the local conditions. You have to start with the local conditions and the context. I think the children perspective, it's more a mindset or than a straight process. But this big approach that we have here in Skärholmen, that is an important basis that gives us the opportunity to plan in an early stage for the space for children, for schools, preschools, playgrounds, and so on. And the mission to be a flagship project regarding social sustainable urban development, we have said that is starting with the local needs. The urban development shall meet the local needs in Skärholmen. That is social sustainability. And in Skärholmen, we have 37,500 inhabitants. And the inhabitants of Skärholmen, they have a little bit less money than the rest of Stockholm. The unemployment are higher, and the children in Skärholmen, well, they have less opportunities to fulfill their dreams than the children in the rest of Stockholm. The high school readiness is lower. The membership in sport clubs or other cultural activities, for example, are lower than in the rest of Stockholm. And the overcrowding is higher in Skärholmen than in the rest of Stockholm. And to start with this data and this statistics is an important knowledge when we work with social sustainability, and also, of course, with the situation for the children in Skärholmen. But we have also worked a lot with interviews and more qualitative data, and that has given us a much more a deeper understanding of the consequences of all these more hard facts and statistics that we already knew. For example, the figures about overcrowding. One boy told us that we live in a 2-bedroom apartment and are 5 siblings. It is hard. We have to share a room. I have a brother. When he is older, he will need his own room. Then me and mom and my little sister will share. Mom thinks we should move, but we want to stay in the same school. Of course, urban development and more housing units can contribute to meet this local need. And also questions about unsafety and why people feel unsafe in public areas is also, we have a much deeper understanding when we talk to people in Skärholmen. We have talked to a lot of different focus groups, of course, but children is an important group to talk to. And all these facts and statistics and learnings that we have gained through interviews, we have said that these are the 6 areas of priority. This is social sustainability in Fokus Skärholmen. These are the local needs. Housing and city environment for local needs, safety and the feeling of safety, girls and women's access to public spaces, children and youth activities, levels of employment and participation and knowledge. These are the needs that the urban development shall meet. And we are not doing this all by ourselves, of course. In Skärholmen, the city of Stockholm owns a lot of land. So when we are making the land allocation, when we sell the land to developers, we also ask them to contribute to these local needs. What can you do as a developer? We have these needs, and we ask them to contribute in the same way as we are as a municipality. And there is, as I showed, that we have 16 different projects, and some of the projects are of course situated near schools and so on. So they affect children very, very much. And then we, of course, work with participation of the children. This is one of the projects that is situated near Lillholmsskolan in Vårberg. And then we had workshops together with pupils from Lillholmsskolan. And this is a mutual learning. We and the developers learn about the needs, what the children see, what is good and what is bad in their environment, and what they would like to see in the future. But it is also a way for the children and the pupils at school to learn about the development process. So it's a mutual learning. Parallel with the urban development, we have a lot of park development projects in Skärholmen, and I think that is an important placemaking projects. We have, I think, 5 or 6 different parks that are developed right now, and here we have worked very, very close with children and other focus groups in Skärholmen, not only with involvement and dialogue, but actual co-creation with the people in Skärholmen. For example, we have a park called Trissan, and we have developed a football area right beside this place. And we know that the football fields are mainly used by boys. So we created a place beside the football area that was dedicated to young girls, and this was also a process with teenage girls, and they could express their needs and how should we design an area to meet their needs and what they wanted. And we also work with activation, especially in places where people feel insecure. This is Vårberg Centrum, one of the places in Skärholmen where people feel most insecure. But every Thursday afternoon, we have a Thursday club in Vårberg Center, cultural activities for families and for children. It is, as you can see here, the children are crawling around on the floor in the center. They are not feeling insecure at all at this moment. So this is a way of reclaiming a place where people feel insecure. So I was asked by Marika to talk about the process and where in the process the children's perspective is important. And I think it's more of an approach or a mindset to work with the children's perspective and the children participation. And it's important that you have a top-down perspective, that there is a political aim and a political mission that gives power to the project. But it is extremely important, of course, to work with a bottom-up perspective and to listen to the local needs. And the urban planning is very, very long term, and all of these buildings and all these housing units, it will take 10, 15 years until they are ready. So it's important to also work with activation and projects here and now, like this. Welcome to Skärholmen.
Thank you so much, Karin. It's been really interesting to listen to you talk about such a huge urban planning project. So very interesting. And what I interpret from what you say is that you have really been able to integrate the children perspective in different kind of contexts, in different kind of situations.
And in different kind of ways.
In different kind of ways as well. And it would be interesting to hear your comments on how you've been able to integrate it. But first, I have another question, because something that I often meet from children is a frustration that they are participating in this kind of processes and they are giving their views and ideas. And I think Lilian discussed that briefly as well, indirectly, and then nothing happens. And they don't know what happens, and they doesn't get any feedback or anything like that. So how do you work with that specific problem or issue? How do you give feedback to children in such a huge project? How do you make sure that that happens in every kind of process you arrange?
that is a problem, I think, and that is a problem in all kinds of citizen dialogue. How do you give feedback, and how can you show that you actually have listened? And we are not perfect, but I hope that you can see in all that the dialogue with the children have actually made a difference in the urban planning projects, in our different documents and so on. We always have a children's perspective texts in our document. How have we listened to the children, and what kind of how have they affected the plan? But that's why I also think it's so important to have these more here and now projects at the same time, because in the park development projects, it's much shorter time between engaging in a dialogue and actually see the result in place. So I think that's a good way of working, to have these more short-term projects at the same time as the longer-term projects, because it's much easier a shorter way between dialogue and action.
And you also spoke about politicians and the top-down perspective. So how important have politicians been in this project to ensure the children?
The top-down perspective and the politician, it's important to give a project legitimacy. Is that the right word? Especially out towards the market, to make developers interested to be a part of this. It's perhaps not as important for the child's perspective, but it's important because when we have a political will, it is not something just short firing up and then dying, but it needs to have this political strength.
Yes, and we had a question from the audience concerning the last slide you showed, and we discussed with you previously that we can send out your presentation after the webinar. So I guess that slide will be in the presentation that we can send out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think
I would like to take away some of the pictures with the photos of children on them, because every picture is not okay to share.
Yeah, of course. But I think, yeah, your diagram was very interesting to understand the different type of activities and how they're complementary as well. I think, Lilian, there was another question for you in the chat about your experience with Gothenburg. The question is, how do you feel about Gothenburg's municipality and its view on involvement of children and youth, and what can be done in Gothenburg, especially to involve the children in the decision made for them? And I just want to link that to another comments that was made earlier about the issue of language, and how do we also make the urban planning process and sometimes very technical language available also for children, because that's possible. So what is your take on that, and how can we work better together to implement children's perspective in the city?
Yes, I think I'm going to start answering the language question, and this is something I've actually worked a lot with, because as I think the questions, the person asked the question understands, it's an interesting problem, how we speak to each other and how we speak to children, what language we use. And what we've kind of seen when working with this question is that there's a difference between talking down to children and using language that is easier to understand. So, for example, when speaking to anyone, you always have to understand at which level they are in the subject that you talk about. So, if you for example, work with city planning and you're an expert in this, you can't always expect everyone else to be an expert in this. But when talking to children, especially the children in maybe my forum, which are often very interested in this subject and interested in knowing a lot about the subject, you don't have to explain every part about how the city works. You have to explain some parts, and obviously you can't expect of everyone to know all the time at what level everyone is, but understanding that there's a difference between talking down and explaining something and using more accessible language is it's a big difference. And I feel like the solution to that is having a very, having a respectful conversation with a child. Is you do that by putting yourself at the same level as another person instead of talking up or down to them, which is something I know everyone can do. So it's just a matter of doing it. And the other question, if I answer that to the extent you want, but the other question about, let's see, I can just put it up so I have it in front of me.
It was about what can be done in Gothenburg, initially.
Sure. So I think Gothenburg actually, not stepping on Karin's toes, but is one of the best cities in Sweden at involving youth. And I know that in all municipalities around Sweden, there are rules in place to make sure that in every decision that is made in the city, we have to write about the children's perspective or how this will impact children, which I think is really interesting and really important, because even when building a bridge or something that isn't, notably in connection with children, you have to always think about how will this affect children in the future, and how will this affect the accessibility to the city and different things that the children are involved in. And so I think that in Gothenburg we have a really strong system where, in this forum, children are elected by the public, which is really interesting and something that I haven't seen anywhere else. And that creates a really representative forum of really different voices, and something that is really usual in forums where children participate is that, or where I guess youth, maybe teenagers, participate, is that it's usually the same kind of people. It's the people often that are presidents of the student councils in schools, and it's the people that have high grades and really want to participate and have a background with parents that are highly educated often. And what we've seen in our forums is that when people can be elected just by what they find important in the city, and they are voted on by people who find the same subjects important, we have a really representative forum where people come from every part of, the socioeconomic parts of society, and people have different backgrounds. Even I don't think everyone is the president of their student council, but when I'm talking about school, I want to add that I think that different parts of the city use different amounts of children's voices, and a part where I think it needs to get much better is in schools. I think that the schools and the boards in schools need to be better at using the children in discussing how schools should be bettered and how it should be optimized, and how the thoughts of children should become a more natural part of how we develop schools and how we change problems. And so that's something I really like to add. Is there something I haven't answered? Is there something that I would wish for in Gothenburg specifically to involve children? As I said, I think we have a great system where there are so many ways of youth to get involved, but the biggest problem, I think, doesn't lie in the municipal part of society, because as Karin said, we have really strong documents and structures in place to make sure that children are heard, especially now since the Children Convention became law in Sweden. That was last year, I think. And something that I think needs to change more is how the politicians of Sweden view the youth perspective, because they aren't really employed by the city in the same way that the civil servants are. and they have much. They are much freer in how they interpret and how they view the children's voices. And so something that I think needs to change is how politicians use the young voice, and perhaps children should be more involved in real decision making when decisions are being made about children, not just, you know, as a reference group, but as part of the decision. I'm not sure, but that's something I think absolutely needs to change.
Thank you, Lilian. And it's great that you talked and discussed representation, because this is very important, and we have some questions about that. And I would like you also, Karin, to reflect on that subject. So one question is, how do you ensure you have the voices of marginalized children who struggle to have a voice in any aspect of their lives? How have you taken care of that in Fokus Skärholmen? And another question, kind of on the same topic, but not directly, but is it a common problem that high educated planners with a background of high income standards comes into the areas believing that they have the right answers for poorer people in areas with social problems? So it would be very interesting to hear you, Karin, reflect on that.
Yeah. The weaker groups, we know who they are. We know, or I should start like this. We know which people who come when we invite to a dialogue or to discuss urban planning. We know the same people come. So we have a goal in this project to reach out to other groups, and especially the groups that we know normally don't engage in city planning. And we have said that's children, it's women, and it's people that are unemployed, and people who don't speak so good Swedish. And then we have tried to work seeking them up. Of course, I cannot promise you that we have met everyone, or that we have ensure that everyone has spoken, but we have tried to be in places where these groups are, like on the schools, for example, on the preschools, on arbetsförmedlingen, the working, the place where you seek for work, and so on. So we have tried to be not just inviting people, but also being there. So that's a way of working with, try to find engage so many people as possible. And also I work at the Department of Development, and our office is situated in the city center, but we work really close together with the district department, and that is an important way of how we work in Fokus Skärholmen, because the local district department, they know their inhabitants. They have connections with all these, with people in Skärholmen. So we have worked very close together with them. And the other question was about how well-educated people. Yes. I think a lot of us, we knew a lot about Skärholmen when we started, but as I said, for example, the question about overcrowding, that people are living in smaller apartments than their families. I think these interviews, and especially with children, gave us a much, much deeper understanding of the consequence, how important it is that the housing units we build now will meet that need. So I think a lot of facts we already knew, but these voices kind of deepened our understanding for it. And also, I think when we look at statistics and facts, it is always a medel. It's the, do you understand? It is not the statistics. It is the average, exactly. But that doesn't mean that there are people that have all kinds of socioeconomic background in Skärholmen. So don't underestimate the people in Skärholmen, I think we have learned. So the way of working with more participation and dialogue, I think it has given us much more knowledge about the place.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karin and Lilian. And unfortunately, we have to conclude the discussion now. I have so many more questions, and I think in the chat as well, there are more questions. But it was really, really interesting. I just want to say a few words of conclusion and takeaways. I think both of you have talked very interestingly about mindset and approach, both in the way we respect and acknowledge children, but also in the way we integrate this approach throughout the urban planning process. It was really important to talk about representation and the democratic process as well, and talk about the importance of other bodies and organizations, whether it's the local city council, like you talked about, Karin, or the Pupils Council, like you talked about, Lilian, not undermining these representative and elected and democratic bodies that are existing. And yeah, I think all of you have pointed at very inspiring examples and methods for involving children, and we'll get back to that next time. I think in 6 weeks. I don't have the date exactly in mind right now. We have another webinar on child-friendly cities, this time dedicated to design and what it means to design cities from the perspective of children as well. The recording will be available and sent to you, and as well as some other PowerPoints or documents that Lilian and Karin will send to us. And sorry that we don't have more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.